All right. Good morning, Dan. How you doing?
Good. How about you, Pedro?
All
Living good
good.
in that new hat?
All good over here. Preparing for a storm. There's a tropical storm coming to Puerto Rico and the rest of the Caribbean. So we're prepping over here. How are things over there?
It's unseasonably hot and dry, so I think we're going to be starting to conserve some water here. I'm about an hour east of New York, so it's probably the hottest late July I've seen in a long time.
Well, I hope things get cooler. I hope things get better over here. I know we're still. I think the biggest thing that's going to happen this week is it's the deadline for Call for Code. We have 3 days, 15 hours, and 24 minutes left.
Oh, you're not looking at that stressful countdown clock, are you?
I am not. I am not. So it's the final push for all those developers who are finishing their projects, creating their videos, finalizing your GitHub repos. You have 3 more days. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about final questions that you may have about your submission, as well as any other questions you have about Call for Code.
Yeah, so definitely get your questions in the comments. So Pedro and I will take you through some of the best practices for submissions. Most people, if you're like anybody else in the competition and you're not alone, waiting to the last minute to make sure you've got your best presentation, your best submission ready to go. So most people do wait till this last week to make sure they maximize their time. So we've learned that it's always very helpful for people to get their questions in, help them get them over the finish line, make sure they avoid some easily avoidable problems, right? There are some things in there that could disqualify you that you want to avoid. There are other things that are really important that may not seem like they are. And then we also want to make sure that the frequently asked questions you have are answered in general about the competition, judging, and what happens next if you happen to be a winner. So hopefully we'll cover all that stuff. And we can, I guess I have a few just slides just to give back an overview of kind of where we are with Call for Code. So let's see if Scott can share my screen. I think I have to actually push up my share screen. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and for those who are listening, where is everyone from? Call for Code is a global movement to solve problems around the world. It's not just the Caribbean. It's not just California. It's not just South America. It's all places around the world. So we would love to hear, where is everyone calling in from?
Yeah, and don't forget too, we can continue this conversation not only here at this office hours, but also in the Slack workspace. So you can introduce yourself there too. We've got lots of channels to join Slack. If you don't get your questions in here, go to callforcode.org/Slack. That'll get you a platform where you can enter in your info, and then it'll send you an invite to join the community. So definitely do that. So let's just get some re-ground ourselves with Call for Code in general. Just so you're aware, as you prepare your last final finishing touches on your submission, really the mission we're after with Call for Code and how to frame your solution to capture exactly what we want to see from the competition. So Pedro, is my screen sharing okay here? All right, unless you're
yes, it is.
All right, perfect. Want to make sure we get that right. Got 3 monitors going on here, and I can't maximize it.
You got this.
Consuming StreamYard's good. Okay, yeah. So Call for Code. This is the 3rd year we've been into it. So we are looking forward again to see some amazing applications that have been built for some of the world's largest challenges. So this year we were fortunate enough to have climate change track in partnership with the United Nations, which is celebrating its 75th anniversary. As well as a 10-year countdown to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a large competition this year focused on climate change as well as COVID-19 apps. And in both cases, what we want to see are applications that are going to end up as effective, sustainable, long-term projects. So the drive towards submission is one thing, bringing that seed of that idea, maybe that prototype that's maybe not too mature. But we are going to recognize the top 5 teams, and what we're going to do is support those ideas that you bring to the competition fill in some gaps maybe that you might have in some hardware expertise, software expertise, user experience, things like that. So what you bring to the Call for Code competition, we're going to be judging them starting next week. But if you happen to be one of the winners, you'll also have the opportunity to take your application further. So there's, of course, a great cash prize here. There's for not only the winner, but also the second and third place teams, third and fourth as well. And we do have a university prize as well this year. So another $10,000 prize that you might be eligible for if you're at a educational institution. So the prizes are great. Check those out. Make sure that you know what sort of things that you can expect if you're one of the top teams. But as I said before, really, so what you got to keep in mind when you're developing an application is really what we try to do with Call for Code is to make sure that those ideas, maybe those incomplete ideas, and they could be in various states of maturity that you bring to the submission deadline, is that they get the support to be connected with partners, such as when we deployed the first year's winning project in Puerto Rico. Pedro was down there. We had some great support from a co-working space and IoT lab called Engine 4, as well as ITDRC, which is a set of volunteers that provide restoring network access, providing hardware to schools, providing connectivity to all sorts of businesses. So bring together your idea and bring it to where that code can actually make a difference is really the key thrust of what we're trying to do with Call for Code. And then beyond that support, we hope to see the projects bloom into open source projects that are sustainable, have their own communities, and maybe even have the submitting team form a company around them. So we really want to see, as you create your application now, try to envision its future beyond the competition. And that's where the roadmap comes in pretty handy in your submission materials, which we'll get to later. Okay, I won't get too much into the previous winners, but you can learn a lot about the successful projects that came out the last 2 years. If you look up Project Owl, what they had built in terms of a hardware and software solution for restoring network access quickly and cheaply after a storm. Hopefully we don't need that later this week in Puerto Rico, but we've got some nodes down there. We should probably have some interesting data come out at the end of the week if the hurricane stays on its current track.
Definitely. We will be prepared. Yeah. We are prepared.
Yeah, so very exciting to see how that technology, is deployed and is really stressed potentially this week. So again, trying to make a real difference with what you create for the competition. There is also last year's winner, if you look them up, is Prometeo. I don't have them in this set of slides here, but go check them out. We did some great field testing with their solution in February. So we were able to validate their solution for protecting firefighter health by monitoring exposure to chemicals. Was something that was could be fleshed out into a version 2, and we're working with them right now on a version 3 in partnership with an IBM Service Core team. So that's part of the prize of the competition is you get cash prize, get support to create an open source project from the Linux Foundation out of what you built, and you get a set of volunteers. In the case of Prometeo, we got 8 folks working with them right now and connecting them with other firefighting organizations around the world who are volunteering to build out the next prototype of what they built. So check out Prometeo. Maybe I can show their submission video later if we have some time. So let me get into a bit of the mechanics of the competition here. So I'm actually going to drop out of the presentation there and get you to basically where you want to go check out all the kind of the edges and the parameters around of Call for Code. So as Pedro noticed, we've got a countdown clock going on callforcode.org. This is the site for the official rules. This is the site for the information about news on judging, winners, other happenings in the community. In particular, some of the applications we recognized earlier on the COVID track. You can learn about their stories right now. And within this .org site, you'll find information on the challenge. The challenge page has you register through that link, which is taking part in the competition. But if you go to learn about the competition, you can check out the prizes, again, some details on university eligibility, the timeline. We're driving towards July 31st, I'm sorry. And down here at the bottom, you'll find some information around the judging criteria. So again, as you prepare your materials, consider how they match each of these 4 criteria. And then check out the rules as well. So in particular, group teams of up to 5, everybody over at least 18 years old. You have to accept the participation agreement that determines the eligibility, shows the prizes, things like that. And kind of a key derailment factor we want to avoid here when you create the submission is just keep an eye. IBM is the founding partner for Call for Code in partnership with various other organizations. We're providing the technology for the competition. So we've made a whole bunch of services available for you. So make sure you use at least one of those. And you can use them in various formats. You can run IBM systems. You can run a virtual machine. You can run a Cloud Foundry application, a Kubernetes cluster, a serverless function. Connect that to a whole bunch of Watson AI services, maybe some blockchain. And as you iterate, you can do that locally, but you have to use at least one IBM Cloud service. And that's where the registration phase of what's involved comes to play.
So Dan, I know that we have a few questions lined up.
Yep.
How about we get into them and start talking a little bit more about the rules? And I know there's other people who are watching who have very specific questions about their projects. So if you do, feel free to put them in the chat right now. This is your opportunity to have Dan and I answer your questions live. So without further ado, let's get started. So Dan, first question: how do I declare my team? How does that work?
Yeah, this is definitely one of our most common questions. So when you take part in the competition, you register and get your IBM Cloud account as an individual. And you start to explore the problem domains for COVID or climate change, kind of understanding where things are. And then as you kind of get a feel for the competition, we have folks move into the Slack community to start to find teammates and work on their idea with like-minded folks or people who have a skill set that they don't have. So the process is you register as an individual. You do a lot of learning, research yourself, but then joining Slack, you'll find other people. And it's not only at submission time that you actually specify who is on your team. So even at this point right now, you may have been working on your application, lots of different ideas in different areas with different folks. But what you all have to do is at submission time, decide which of the one applications you've been working on and with which teammates you've been working is going to be the one you submit for the competition. So it's when you enter the submission form, the team lead will list out up to 4 other teammates. Each teammate in turn accepts the participation agreement on their own, and that represents your team. And so at submission time, we'll take the last submission based on that submitting team member's name and a list of folks that they've identified, and that represents your team. Again, everybody has to be over 18, and you can only have up to 5 people on your team. But yeah, it's really in the submission form, and we can take a look at that later.
All right, awesome. So moving on to our next question. Can I update my app after the submission deadline? I think that's a very good question. People want to keep developing their applications. I know in my case, in Puerto Rico, we have problems to solve, right? So probably a few teams are participating here, and then the rest of the world are actively working on a solution that might be kind of deployed or in production already. So can we keep updating the application after the submission?
Yeah, this is a common question we've gotten, and we've kind of approached it. We've evolved our approach to it over the last couple of years. But in general, we've got a competition. There are rules. We want to make sure it's fair for everybody. So what you submit for the competition, that is what is going to be judged. So whatever you can pull together by midnight, July 31st Pacific time, and you submit, you're going to provide a link to a GitHub repository in there. That is what the judges are going to go after. So that thing right there it must stay essentially frozen, except for some very minor type of things. So you can fix a typo here and there. You can see in the commit history exactly what you've done after the deadline. So small typos, security updates. So we all get those Dependabot alerts from GitHub, I'm sure, about bumping, Lodash up to 1.0 11.17 or whatever it is today.
Yeah.
So you can take those, and if you have any sort of like automatic deployment or build procedures, you can let those continue to run, right? So maybe, as you commit something to, an update, a typo in your README, it kicks off an automatic build. That's okay. And the other thing too to be aware of is, if you're using light accounts on IBM Cloud, if you don't touch any of your services for 30 days, they're automatically deleted. So it's actually encouraged you kind of, poke them here and there to make sure they're still running if you need them up there. But if you do want to do substantial changes to your code in parallel to what you submitted, we recommend you either fork it or clone it or put it somewhere else, or even a branch within the same repository. Yeah. And so do your application, outside of whatever main repository or branch that you submitted. You can work outside of that. And in fact, it's as Pedro had mentioned, right? We want these things to make a difference in the world. We don't want them to stall. We don't want you to lose momentum. So, and actually, if you happen to be the winner, you've got a leg up now on your deployment because you've done more work during the judging in parallel that maybe the service core team or partners can help you immediately after the award ceremony in October. So we do encourage that. Just make sure it's not in the main branch and you do it outside of what you built.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Next question. So how complete does my code have to be? Another great question. I think, especially for people who got started maybe a little bit later in July or even this week, it's kind of hard to think that your application has to be complete by that day. You have to include your cloud services. Maybe you have to have an application for both Android and iPhone. So I know many developers, when the time comes, they feel a little bit overwhelmed with what they can submit. So how complete does the code have to be in order to qualify and be competitive for Call for Code?
Yeah, there's no real right answer to this because it all depends. You're basically being graded on a curve against a whole bunch of other submissions. So we can't say, you have to have these things in order for you to do well, because it all depends on the other number of folks participating. But there are some good tips, I think, out there for approaching this issue. And even in last year's top 5 winners was interesting because, you look at the judging criteria. One of them is completeness and transferability. Yep. But if you are maybe a little bit weaker in that area and you're much stronger in the other 3 judging criteria, you still have a good shot. So if you looked at last year's finalists, I think some of them had really amazing innovation, creative ideas, but they weren't maybe as complete, and yet they still did well, right? So a lot of it is being very clear about what your solution does, trying to show maybe in the whole landscape of what it's intended to be, one little use case where you're doing it really well, showing something in action, really showing some amazing results, something that'll wow the judges. And also what's really important is your roadmap. So as part of submission, you should lay out essentially what you've built, where it is now, and where you plan to go. Maybe even in that, parallel activity that you're carrying on with, but thinking about what you want to do once you have some funding, once you have some mentorship, once you have a service core team with you. So try to make it, of course, as complete as possible, but focus on having it do something very good rather than doing a lot of things poorly. So keep that vision, that overall vision in the submission materials. Keep your code tight and functional.
Definitely. And just to add, if you can't finish, if it's today's Tuesday and the deadline is on Friday, and you're noticing that your code is not running well, again, just try. We're going to evaluate the submissions on completeness and other judging criteria. So like Dan said, try to make sure you have one thing working very well instead of trying to have the whole system, if you have multiple applications connecting with each other, working, right? So focus on what works for the deadline, and then create a roadmap and the vision for the future once the submission ends. All right, so next question. Does my app have to keep running throughout the judging period?
Yeah, so this is a good one. This is related to what I've mentioned about the light accounts. If they're not touched for 30 days, they'll be deleted. What the judges will look at is, number one, and especially the non-technical judges. So there's a whole array of judges that are going to be looking at your solution over several rounds. Some of them are very technical. They'll go into your source code. They'll try to stand it up themselves. They'll try to inspect everything, test it, prod it. We do a deep dive there. But there are other judges that really want to see kind of the end result of what's going on. So if you want to convey that by having a running demo, you can definitely have an app, hosted, maybe, a website up, or kind of a mobile backend or something like that that they can, really interact with. But the safer solution, I think, in many cases, is actually just to make sure either within your 3-minute video, you have a clear demo of the thing working, so people get the idea of what it's doing. And you can include that in your 3-minute video, but you also have the option in your source code repository to add additional videos, maybe longer versions, maybe one specific chapters or sub videos on some portion of your application. Consider building those too. So in case your app just happens to not be up, or it crashed or whatever it is, at least there's some material the judge can look at and see what it was like when it was running, and making sure that it's clear the completeness that's there, the innovation that's there. So you don't have to keep it up. I know Kubernetes clusters, for example, if you happen to pay for one, they're not cheap to run over the course of a couple of months without touching them. It's kind of a waste. So feel free to bring those back down. In particular, with your applications, you should have configurations where you can recreate stuff later anyway. That's a good practice for building great source code in your repository and deploying it to the cloud anyway. So do have those instructions handy, and always have a backup, of course, so you don't get surprised if your database goes away.
Definitely. All right. So moving on to our next question. Can I provide a video longer than 3 minutes?
Yeah, so I touched on this one before too, right? So in their submission, what the judges are asked to do is look at your video, and they're only going to watch the first 3 minutes of it. So ideally, you have everything under 3 minutes when you submit in your video there. But there is a cutoff at the end, maybe 1 or 2 seconds really is not going to make that much of a difference. But if you really can't, with your current cut of the video, get it down to 3 minutes and 10 seconds. If it has to be 4 minutes, it has to be 5 minutes. What you should do is break it into 2 videos. Keep the longer one, again, linked from your source code repository, that long form original one. But in your pitch video, really get that thing under 3 minutes. Hit the key ideas, have the judge interested in learning more, really invite them to go to your repository to dig into it. We really want to wow them as quick as you can in that 3 minutes.
All right, awesome. So next question. What's the IP around my solution? Very good question. I think this is one of the first questions a lot of people ask when they're creating open source software. Like, once we go through this competition, what happens to my code? So what does the Apache license mean exactly, Dan?
Yeah, so when you accept the participation agreement, there's some information on the Apache license within that. And essentially what the participation agreement IP clauses allow to happen is, number one, they give the judges the rights to actually look at your app, right, to explore the source code. So that's number one, is we've got to have a license to explore it, right? But more importantly is the Apache 2 license is there because our end goal of Call for Code is sustainable open source projects. Ideally, the top 5 ones do, go on to become amazing open source communities. Maybe some of the additional ones that didn't, or maybe they're a regional winner or university winner, maybe something that people want to continue building. It's just a good practice to have the Apache 2 license in there. From the IBM point of view, it's our favorite license. It's the one most commonly used by startups creating businesses around open source. There are other license options, but Apache 2 is the one we request that you associate with your source code repository. And I think it's a good middle ground in general. If you compare it to other more permissive ones or ones less permissive. So it's really there to make sure that you have a leg up. after the competition to take your idea forward with an open source community, but also that the innovation generated from Call for Code is something that can be used by the world. So maybe, you don't care to move on with your submission after the competition, but if you've got a public source code repository licensed Apache 2, maybe somebody else will pick it up and run with it. They may be interested in it. Maybe they heard about the competition. They want to explore it. And again, with the participation agreement, if you do get selected as one of the top 5 teams, this is a requirement. So you do need to license your code as an Apache 2 project in order to accept the prizes.
Exactly. Yep. So if you have more questions about the Apache license, I recommend you you check out the Call for Code sample repository, right, Dan?
Yeah. And actually, you know what? Let me share that, and we can kind of go through that, because I answer some of these questions as well.
Yes.
So let us.
By the way, if you have questions, leave them in the comments section. We'll get right to them soon.
Yep, great. Okay, so if you go to Call for Code, let me pop my screen resolution up a little bit. Oh, yeah, that's too much. If you go to callforcode.org/submit, you'll see not only the forms for submitting the application, you'll also find some information right below that with some of these tips and some detail on what's asked for in the form. So within this item number 5, there's a link to a sample repository. People fork that. They use that as the basis of their submission. It's very popular for doing that. I think the last 2 winners actually did that, which made it really easy to judge and for them to see what they needed to include. And so, and there's also, I'll get back to this other example over here. But yeah, so there's a project sample repository. And what it is it's a template. You can go ahead and fork that and use this as your starting point. And what's nice about it is it includes some good practices around continuous builds and testing, includes a license template, some readmes, some translation formats you might want to look at, and it includes some documented code as well. So if you just go into one of these, you can see how the Apache 2 license, for example, might be applied to a part of your code. Let me see if I have it in here.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. This is very helpful because I know many people who are just beginning with GitHub don't have much clue on what to include in the repository. So this gives you a complete description, step-by-step, of everything you need to include. So the description, the live demo. If you structure your repository like this, it makes it a lot easier for judges to go through your code. So, by the way, just want to give a shout out to Danelson. I hope that everything's okay.
Nice. Hey, Danelson, good to see you attending. That's awesome. Yeah, awesome. Danelson is one of our contacts in Puerto Rico at the University of Puerto Rico Mayagüez campus. So great to see him participating as well this year. So we do have some other questions I see in the chat. Maybe we'll get to those. So let's see. Anyargia asks, we plan to use a different repository for the submission, and the commits would indicate that we just uploaded it a few days ago. Will that be a problem? No, that will not be a problem. So actually what several people do, they tend to work in GitHub repositories privately, and then when it comes to submission time, they flip the public switch on their repository. That's one way that they approach GitHub repositories. But other people, yeah, they may be developing them completely off of GitHub throughout the competition and only upload them the day of the competition. That's not a problem. Just having one massive commit dump in your repo. We're not going to go through the history of anything up until July 31st. We're more interested in what happens after July 31st, making sure you stay eligible. But yeah, if you've been working in some other location and suddenly you just want to merge everything and do it on the last day, that's perfectly fine.
All right. Next question from rabestudios. How do I get notified for future Call for Code events? Great question. Yeah,
so we do have, once you register for Call for Code, you'll get some regular emails that give you details on what's happening next. So after submission, we'll highlight some of the previous Call for Code year winners. So while you're kind of awaiting judging, you can explore what's been built in the past and maybe contribute to it yourself. And you'll learn about the live stream for the award ceremony, when that's going to happen, and who's going to be presenting there. We've got some great speakers lined up for that already. And you'll also learn about any potential activities that are obviously not going to happen in person through the rest of the year, but also you'll learn about next year's competition. So getting you set up for learning about the resources available, so that when next year comes, you create some brand new fresh code for the competition. At least you have a little bit more awareness of the schedule, the upcoming schedule, things like that. So go to developer.ibm.com/call-for-code, and that'll get you connected to the newsletters by registering.
All right. So I know we have a few more questions in the chat about GitHub. How about we pull it up right now?
Okay, I'm still sharing, I think. There we go. Okay. So Danelson asks, in GitHub, the short description and long description have formats. Do we have to follow them? If the submission says 10 words for a short description, 500 words for a long description, do we need to strictly adhere to that, essentially, is what he's looking at. Yeah, there's no real hard limits to that. It's really about conveying your application in a condensed way is really what you're getting at in the submission. So the short description is generally going to be just, you're probably going to have a submission name or team name or project name. You're going to have a tagline of some short description, and then you may have a deeper page, one page of long description. So if you look in the repo, there's just some sample fake Latin here that kind of just describes what, maybe 500 words looks like. But there is no hard limit. Actually, there may be in the type form. I have to double check that. So good. Thanks for calling that out. I gotta take a look to make sure our form is good. But no, you keep it reasonable. Make sure it's clear, not overly wordy. It'll work against you if the judges are kind of seeing something that's just out of not getting to the point quickly enough.
Yeah, I think and to add what Dan is saying, remember, judges, they're going to be reading a lot of submissions. We have how many submissions do we have already, Dan?
I can't share that number, but
we can't. That was a trick question. But in previous years, we had many thousands of submissions. So just think about how many submissions a judge has to read. So you want to be concise. You want to be quick to the point. So then, it's easier to read for the judges. So consider that when you're writing this out. Let's check here if we have any limitations. So for submission name.
No, looks like that one. There's less than 5 words of guidance, but we're not enforcing it. Yep. Let's see. So
Pedro's app.
10 words. Pedro. Oops. Great. Yeah. So, keep it concise, but the form is not going to enforce anything. And then for long description, it's going to be, a page of text again. Oops, sorry, let's get to here. Let's hit that. Oops, and long description. Long description, yeah.
Yeah, so if this is the first time that you're seeing this type form and you are going to submit, I recommend that you go to the type form, check it out, read it, so you get familiarized with it. Yeah, definitely. And a couple of mechanics about it. You can go ahead in here and just kind of play around with the form if you want. We'll discard garbage entries. We've got a way to do that. So if you really just want to see, you're really nervous about getting it right, go ahead, put in some bogus data. We don't care. We'll weed that out. And just make sure that, and you can't go back and edit your submission afterwards. Unfortunately, type form is stateless. But if you do make a mistake, when you submit, it'll email what you submitted so you can verify that it is actually correct. And if you notice a problem, just go ahead, copy that information, make your corrections, and resubmit again. And we'll just take whatever the last one is from your team lead's email address before the competition deadline. So yeah, I know this is the sort of thing that stresses me out too.
So feel free to really explore this, understand exactly what's needed, how it performs, whether it works on, if you're going to be on a mobile device, it's mobile friendly, but you're probably going to want to be on a computer while you're doing this, and just get a feel for it. There's actually one hard limit, now that I think about it, in this form, and it's not something that can be changed, and it's really around the roadmap. That's the one thing with a hard limit, in that it's a 10 megabyte limit. So if you have something above that, just look at optimizing it, save it out to a different format, maybe a PDF, maybe a presentation format that's a little smaller. You'll want to see what, if having built a roadmap, you don't want to find out the last minute that you got to do some formatting on it.
All right. So if you have any more questions, I think this is also a great opportunity to tell people about our Slack. You can join our Slack if you have further questions, more in detail. Many of the team members have of this year and previous years have met through the Slack. So the Slack is one of the best places to collaborate with other people around the world, meet potential team members, and connect with problem solvers. So definitely join the Slack if you have any other questions, or if you just want to collaborate with other people. So moving on to our next question from YouTube, Christy. We are having a hard time thinking about innovative solutions without the use of hardware, as there are many solutions already existing on climate change. Any suggestions there? So the first thing, at least from my side, Christy, is that Call for Code is not just only hardware solutions. Previous years, there's been hardware winners, but they also have a software part as well. Previous winners also some are just only software. I think SafeQ is just a software solution. So it is not necessary to use hardware. Think of problems first. Like, what problem are you trying to solve that other people have? In the case of COVID-19 and SafeQ, that's just an example. Many people were outside, like this is saying on a gas station or a bank, right? It's the July 31st, and people are going to go pick up their check and cash it in the bank. There's going to be a lot of people in the line, and that could be risky, especially that we live now with COVID-19, right? In a pandemic, you want to keep people safe, keep people in their cars, and avoid people coming into one spot. So what SafeQ is that it allows people to, with an application, be able to see, to create like a queue of line. Dan, if you want to jump in here and explain a little bit better. But basically my suggestion, Christy, is don't worry too much about the hardware side. Focus on solving problems with software.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So, I mean, hardware is great to show off, and the judges always love to see that. But software, it's definitely not required, and you can make a really compelling demo with something software. So a couple of thoughts from me is, number one, SafeQ is a mobile app. It was something for managing lines. Two people, a store manager has a mobile app. The end user has a mobile app. They achieve a social distancing and safety through purely software, which is great. Another really important thing is that we do have a focus on lots of different technology areas. So I'm sharing my screen here, and maybe I can give you some ideas for kind of the sort of things that you might do with purely a software focus. So if you go to developer.ibm.com/call-for-code and get started, you'll learn about, after you've accepted the challenge, you've registered, basically how you can start to understand the tracks and some of the technology there. So we do have starter kits you can look at. Most of those are software based. For example, they have Watson Assistant bots in there, chat bots. So you can learn about some of the tools there, some of the analytics maybe you might want to do around these climate change topics. And if you don't find something in here that's purely software based, we also have in our technical library some information on how to look at artificial intelligence, data science, and other approaches. So one of the software ones I think would be really powerful for climate change would be to do some analysis on a data set, make some predictions, and you can do that in Watson Studio in a Jupyter Notebook. You can do some great analysis there. You can analyze images, process all sorts of data, make predictions. So that's a great place to look. And it's still something that can be really compelling to the judges to show how you were able to determine maybe the risk of flooding, of the rising sea water from climate change in that particular region of the world based on data you brought together.
Great.
Yeah.
And Dan, so I know an additional question that Christy from YouTube has is, innovation is a premise, right? I think what she's trying to mention is the criteria about innovation. Can we stay in a solution involving, for example, sustainable education for children with NGOs, projecting results for 2030? So I guess are the solutions that are going to be judged right now have to do with solutions with problems that we're facing today with COVID-19 and with climate change. So I guess one preamble to Dan's answer would be, innovation really depends on if you're actually solving a real world problem today. If it's a problem in the future that cannot be solved right now with the solutions that we have, it's kind of hard to judge that. So I would think, and one of the reasons why Dan was showing the starter kits is that there are many solutions that work maybe in one area. Let's just say Prometeo, last year's winner, they created a health sensor system for firefighters, and that's an IoT-based platform. They did not create the chip, they did not create the sensors. They're just repurposing the hardware to use it for a specific scenario for firefighters. I could take that same system of sensors and use it to monitor droughts in Puerto Rico. So innovation, not necessarily you have to think about something completely new. It's more about trying to apply the technology into a scenario that it can receive immediate value. Can this help someone today? That's one of the questions I asked, one of my litmus tests for Golf for Code solutions.
Yeah. And this is actually a great lead in to some of the submission tips I have. This is actually number one tip, and I'll answer the question. So Scott, you can share my screen. So don't reinvent the wheel, I think, is an important thing. Last part of Christy's question here is it possible to stand on the podium with a solution that complements or suits what already exists and doesn't create something new? In fact, that's exactly what is a really great approach, right? We don't want you to reinvent the wheel, reconstruct something that maybe is out there that does something really well, try to replace something that's well adopted. When you're looking at your problem space, look what's out there, look what people already use, the tools, the APIs, the languages, the data sets, and try to fill in the gaps. Do something amazing that makes those things better. That's definitely a great submission idea. Look at open standards that exist. See if there's any gaps in how they're used, how powerful they are. Maybe they're just not well known. If you can create an easy way to use them, that's an amazing idea too. So that's a huge, don't reinvent the wheel is a major one. And I might as well just go through a couple more of these tips and then we'll get back to some more questions. I see we have some of those coming in as well. Again, documenting that solution, the source code repository, talking to the problem that you're tactically solving right now, as well as that larger vision you have. You can do that through a bunch of resources in there. Again, we've got the project sample repository to give you a starting point. Spend time on that video. You don't have to be a professional video creator to do something amazing. You can even just share, record your screen with Camtasia or whatever you have built on your machine. There's definitely trials out there, and there's online video creators, but really show what you're trying to solve, focus on what you've built, and then talk about what you would do with this solution in the next phase should you win. And my final tip here before we get to questions, it kind of goes to an earlier question is you can make sure you can keep all your stuff private right now, but once you submit, flip the switch, make sure that if you have a password for a Vimeo video, for example, you either make the video public, which is a lot easier, or you include that in your description somewhere. Make sure that your source code repository is publicly visible. We can't grant individual access to individual judges, for example, to join as an outside collaborator for your solution. It doesn't work that well. It's very frustrating. So we've avoided doing that this year. You can make an unlisted YouTube video. It doesn't have to be public, but as long as people can get to it. Have your friends test your submission. Have a peer who's not logged into GitHub test this stuff, or maybe a teammate. Just make sure that everything is readable, so we're not going to be able to get back to everybody and just tell them to go fix things. It doesn't happen. Judging happens very quickly, very rapidly. So anything you can make it easier for the judges is definitely what you want to do. Okay, so those are my top 4 tips. Let's roll back to any questions.
All right, so first question from Danelson. Can we add a business model canvas with the product roadmap? Is this really relevant to Call for Code, Dan?
It kind of, it's a good question. You can, I think it's very helpful for the judges to kind of understand what your sustainability plans are. The main focus will be on the technology roadmap, but you can prove out, in particular, as part of the research of what you've done for your project, if you can identify, hey, listen, we've looked at the market. This project, this technology, it doesn't exist. It's a long-standing problem. We estimate it to be a $10 million a year market. If we create a solution that's under $100, we could easily make a profit margin. That's all very, you can include that, definitely. Yeah. And I would put that in your long description. And maybe, as potentially as part of the roadmap too, but that's very helpful. And it shows that you've done your homework, that you're solving a real problem, and that you have a real vision for sustainability. So I guess long story short, definitely it's helpful.
However, Dan, and I think I want to pause you here. Be careful. This is not a startup pitch competition. This is we want to see working code. So if you were, what I recommend is that you focus on the code. If you already have those documents, put it in there. Those are supporting documents, and they're going to be helpful to give like the vision of sustainability. But at the end of the day, what judges are going to be looking for is a working prototype, right? A platform that you have code, and then also, if you thought about the long term and how much things are going to cost, that's a plus. But make sure you finish the code.
Exactly. Yeah, and that brings up 2 very, very important types of derailment factors in your submission that I think are really important. We do, and it's really, we're making it very clear in the submission form. We do need that working code. We do need a GitHub repository. What we are explicitly not looking for, and which will disqualify you, is if it's just a high-level thought leadership idea, some crazy thing that you think will work, but there's no follow-up implementation to it. That's not going to go anywhere. And the second related derailment version of that is this isn't a request for a grant. Don't just put in, here's a really detailed, exactly what I'm going to do in the future. And you may have really detailed ideas in there, but if you don't have any code at submission time, even if you have a great idea for a grant, this is not the place to bring it.
Yes, at the end of the day, this is a hackathon. So we want to see code, and we really want to sustain this open source ecosystem of these solutions. All right, so next question. Since there are 2 tracks, I think this year, we've had a lot of questions with these 2 tracks. Will there be more than 5 finalists, more than 1 global winner?
Yeah, good question, right? So we did launch the year with the single track and the single set of 5 prizes, as we've done in previous years. We do have 2 tracks, but we have kept the prize structure the same. So we do have just 5 awards. Half of those or all of them or many of them, they may be one track or another, depending on the quality of the solution we get. So at this point, it's the same 5 prizes. What is a little bit more expanded this year in terms of prizes, though, is like last year, we're going to be doing regional awards. Maybe there's something that's really relevant to a particular area around a particular issue. And we also have that university track prize. So there are additional prizes out there, additional types of distribution that maybe, a COVID solution is much more relevant, for example, in the United States right now, than a climate change solution is in the South Indian Sea with rising sea levels. So even if it doesn't make the top 5 as part of one of those tracks, if there's a really pressing regional issue at that point, that may be more eligible for a regional prize. But yeah, the prize structure is the same right now.
All right. So moving forward, we have a few minutes left. So if you have any other questions, pop them now in the comments. If we don't have time, if we go over, please sign up for the Slack if you're not there. We have mentors who are available up to the last moment to help you. So really join the Slack if you have any further questions that need more details. So next question here, do we need to build app only based on starter kits? Community cooperation, remote education, crisis, or can I select any other topic related to COVID-19?
Yeah, good question. So the starter kits are there both in the climate change track as well as COVID-19. There's 3 starter kits. And really the goal of what those are is to take the abstract idea of COVID or climate change, pick out a particular important use case, and show how you might solve that problem. So as a starter kit, they're really there to start your ideation. But if you have a different idea that is related to water sustainability, energy sustainability, or disaster resiliency, it doesn't have to neatly fit into any of those categories as long as it rolls up to climate change. And same thing with COVID. What we are focusing on, though, there's a caveat there, is that we want to see social and business applications. We're not looking for
vaccine science,
vaccine deep research. There's other efforts coming from IBM and others around the science, and obviously large medical facilities, large research facilities are working on those for applications for Call for Code, really about things like SafeQ, using a simple mobile app to manage a small business and customers, the flow of them into the store to keep everybody safe. So really looking at just anything that's going to improve how remote education is done, or maybe even something else, how sports are done in the context of new restrictions, how games can be played, how children can not only learn, but maybe do other things as well. So you don't have to stick to those strict pillars, but keep in mind that we're not looking for analyzing medical charts with visual recognition. That gets into really regulated type of stuff. It's really hard to recognize something that's going to be powerful and easy to deploy and supports an open source project if it delves into some of those really medical focused areas, those highly regulated areas. So that's my one piece, is just avoid those. But anything within the abstract idea of COVID-19, it's still eligible.
Okay, great. So I think we're wrapping up here with our questions. We have a few minutes left, so if you have a question, here's your chance. By the way, Dan, where can people sign up for the Slack?
Okay, yeah. So let me actually let's see if I should share my screen again. Why don't I take kind of through the final steps. So when you go to developer.ibm.com/call-for-code, we'll get that URL up on the screen. You get started. There's a set of steps, right? There's 4 steps. Number 1, you accept the challenge. That gets you your cloud account. That gets you registered for the competition. And then you work through the technology we mentioned, the starter kits. You learn about the competition. And this 3rd step here, find your squad. There's a link here to join the community on Slack. So if you click that, it'll pop up the inviter to Slack. And you can, this is how you get in. It'll send an email from me, actually, inviting you to Slack. And if you already have, and maybe you don't get an email, maybe you signed up for Slack in the past, you can go try to log in, reset your password if that was the case. But directly get in there. You'll be dropped into a set of default channels. So one of which is a general channel. There's a help desk channel. There's team building channel. And then there's sub channels for all of the starter kits as well. So definitely go ahead and explore that.
Yes. And just in case, the link again is callforcode.org/Slack. You can go to that link and that will take you to the Typeform where you can sign up.
Yeah, and I believe it's linked as well from just .org. Yeah, there we go. It's also on callforcode.org. You can also find some social sharing information, but join the community is there as well.
Awesome. So please connect with us if you have questions. Here we have another one from Danelson. Do we list Weather Channel API or any other APIs as technology used from IBM? Good question.
Yeah, that's a great one, and definitely it is. So anything that's an IBM cloud platform service, anything that's in our catalog, even if it comes from a third-party developer, Twilio, for example, in there, or anything that's in the IBM cloud catalog counts as an IBM service. Anything that's a Red Hat service, so maybe if you're running OpenShift, or even if you're running a Red Hat Linux box, those count because they're systems or services. And because the weather company is part of IBM, you can list that as your IBM service. And you just have to have one. So if you just simply consuming, putting a mobile backend up, running on a Node.js Cloud Foundry runtime, that's eligible. If you're using just Watson Assistant as the bot, that's eligible. If you're using CloudInt as a database, that's all eligible too. So, just find one service. Yeah, just one service. So, yeah.
All right. So it looks that we are done for today. Once again, if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us on the Slack. Good luck to everyone. We have 3 days left. The submissions are due Friday, 11:59 Pacific time. Make sure to submit before that time. It may be very stressful that, those last hours, you never know what can happen. Your electricity could come out. So make sure to have enough time to push that submit button.
Yep. And as they say in Chicago, submit early and submit often. So even if you're not fully complete, if you just submit what you have right now, you provide just a link out to your GitHub repository. You can obviously keep working on the GitHub repository, but at least you have your submission in, right, until the deadline. So maybe just get a draft in or whatever it is, submit it on Thursday, and then refine it, and that at least makes sure that you're entered in the competition.
Awesome. So thank you so much for everyone who was watching. We wish you the best of luck, and we'll hope to see you soon next time. Bye.